Hi there, my name is Adela Talbot and I'm a board member of Women in Politics. Women in Politics has launched the 2020 Ask Her campaign as part of an effort to encourage women to consider running for office in an upcoming election at any level of government. This campaign's primary goal is to support all women who would like to become involved with politics by sharing the experiences, perspectives, and advice of other women who've already entered this arena. We will hear from women who previously served in public office, from current elected officials, and women who have run in the past. All women will offer their advice and experience to help inspire other women to enter the race. And above all, we want to achieve the goal of having more women's voices at decision-making tables. Today, we welcome Shawna Lewkowitz, who is a former federal NDP candidate in London West. She is the founder of Women in Politics and president of Urban League London. Welcome, Shawna. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So Shawna, I really want this to be a conversation, so I want it to be something where you share your experience with us and advice. I have some guiding questions for you, but I don't want to interrupt. I just want to hear from you. If you want, we can start the conversation by you telling me a little bit about the moment that you decided to run, what brought you to that decision, kind of what you had to overcome to actually commit to that decision, and then anything along the way of campaign challenges, your experiences of women on the campaign trail, hurdles that you had to overcome, how you overcame them, things like that. So you can take it away any way you like, and I can chime in with follow-up questions as needed, but really I just want to hear from you.
Okay. So the moment that I decided to run, it wasn't really a moment. It's more of a process, but similarly to many women, I had to be asked many times before I said yes. This time around, I received a phone call from London West MPP Peggy Sattler. It was the December before the next 2019 election, and she'd asked me if I'd consider running as a nominee candidate for London West for the federal election. And I'd been given advice in the past that when you're asked to run, that you don't say no right away. In my head, I was already saying no. I was coming up with all the reasons that this wasn't the right time, honored to be asked. But instead of saying no, I did what I would advise other women to do, and that's to ask more questions and think about it. So I asked Peggy what would be the priorities of the federal NDP for that election. And she said, as far as she understood, it would be Indigenous rights, electoral reform, housing, and climate change. And that gave me pause because much of the work that I had been doing up until that point was very locally based, and it was really important to me, and I knew it made a difference. But things like climate change and Indigenous rights and housing in our own community were issues that were really honestly keeping me up at night, and that's not an exaggeration. The angst that many of us feel was what I was feeling. And I recognized that these issues, although really important at the local level, that in order for big structural systemic change, there needed to be national policy changes around that. And the fact that the NDP was committing to that, one told me that their values were aligned with mine, because at that point, I wasn't necessarily part of the sort of inside NDP, and also that there was potentially the opportunity to make a difference. But I was still pretty sure I was saying no. But I decided, as you do, to tell her that I would think about it and get back to her. And when I got off the phone, my youngest daughter, who's a teenager, was there, and she asked me who was on the phone, and I told her it was Peggy and why she had called and that she'd asked me to run, and that I wasn't going to say yes. And she turned to me right away and she said, "Mom, you have to do it." And I said, "I don't think that this is the right time." She was just going into grade 9 at that point, so just starting high school. My other daughter was still in high school. I wasn't sure that I was the right person. Surely there were better candidates out there than me. I gave her reason after reason why I shouldn't do it. And she said to me, "Mom, listen to yourself. All the things that you're saying are all the things you've heard from other women over all the years that you've convinced to run. And the reasons, she basically shone the mirror back on me and said, you're giving all the reasons that women say no, and they're not reasons. And if there was a moment, it was a long process from there still, but if there was a moment where things got serious, I would say that that was it. Obviously, there's something pretty powerful about a young woman that you've raised kind of turning your own words and advice back on you, but also, the support of her and the support of family and their belief in me and their desire to see me do it, because it is such a big commitment as a family. It's not just about me, it's the impact that it has on all of them, was pretty huge. And so then I went to my next daughter, and at this point I was a little more open to it, and kind of same conversation, and right away she said, of course. And then I went to my partner, and not that he was last on the list, just the order that it went in of who was home. And, not surprising, he was 100% in. And I, walked through like, this is what it's going to mean for our life. This is what the kind of time and energy and he knows, and said, that's okay. We've got it. I've got it. What else do you need to know to make this decision? And so I guess that's sort of where it kind of moves on from there into, talking to other people, talking to the people who knew me best. Do you think that, that I'm cut out for this? Do you think this is the right decision at the right time? All those types of things. And then probably one of the most important pieces next to my family was knowing some key people within the NDP who would support me. And I had faith in them, and I knew they knew the real deal of, this is what it takes to run. This is what you go through. And when they said that they'd be willing to put their support behind me, that was sort of the clincher, because particularly at the provincial and the federal level, you can't do it on your own. You need a team. You're the candidate, but there's, dozens and dozens of people behind you are actually making it all happen. You're just the face and the voice and the person who's bringing forth the ideas. So, there wasn't really a moment, but that's sort of the journey and the process. And there were obviously some questions I needed to answer for myself as well.
Yeah, that's great, Shawna. It sounds like you had a really solid support system the whole time, and I can appreciate that it took time to get there. I'm wondering if you could talk, so that now that you'd arrive at that decision, I'm wondering if you can touch a little bit about your experience on the campaign trail, and specifically your experience as a woman on the campaign trail. How did it compare to what you expected? Was it what you expected? Were there particular challenges that you faced?
Mm-hmm. So there were three things that I committed to for myself when I said yes to run. One was that I would give it 100%, that I knew at the end of it, win or lose, that I wanted to know I gave it all I had. The second thing was that my integrity was of prime importance, and that I didn't want to compromise who I was for politics. And that sounds like a really easy thing to say, and not to say that I was pressured in any way to do that. It's just what can happen, particularly if the party or that moment in the party and their values aren't necessarily aligned with what you are, where you are. And then the third thing was that it was always going to be about the people and the issues. And, those three things, I think I ended the campaign feeling really good that that's what I had maintained. But campaigning is a bit like becoming a parent, in that you can talk to people, you can support people. I'd worked on campaigns, I'd been told what it was like, and you have an idea, but until you're really in it, it's hard to describe and to know. And it really was everything that I thought it would be, and a whole bunch more and different at the same time. the one thing that probably surprised me the most was that I ended up absolutely loving knocking on doors, like more so than any other part of the campaign. And like a lot of people, it was probably one of the pieces that I was most fearful of or intimidated by, imagining people slamming doors in your face and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, people are very kind and they're very generous with their time, and people are wanting to tell you their stories. They want, if you give them the opportunity to tell you what's important, they will. And so, you're campaigning every single day, particularly in the election period, but even leading up to that, we were at the doors a lot, and it's exhausting and it's tiring, but it is what it's about, right? It's about people and how issues impact their lives. And so that was a surprise to me, how much I loved it. So much so that after the election, I really missed it. I was like, maybe I'll just go knock on some people's doors, hear what they have to say. But in terms of the challenges as a woman, I have a lot of things. I have a lot of privileges. I'm white, I'm heterosexual, I'm cisgendered, I am, middle class. And so I had a lot of the supports in place that can be challenges for women in terms of the structural pieces. As I said, my partner and my family, they did everything. I didn't cook, I didn't clean, I didn't grocery shop, I didn't do anything for my kids except show up for them as their mom. And when the campaign was on, I was 100% the candidate most of the time. And so I didn't have those other pieces that I think are really significant, really important when there's other layers that are there. But for sure, the sexism is present. As nice as people are at the door, most of the negative situations I had were with men, and often about me being a woman, being called names, being accused of being a lesbian as if that was an insult for some reason, being identified as a feminist because I believe it probably said that in my bio. I've, proudly identify as a feminist most of my adult life. So a lot of it wasn't even new to me. I'm used to being challenged, but like yelled at, chased a couple times, if maybe twice, feeling slightly unsafe. But that wasn't shocking to me. Not that it was pleasant, but through many different experiences with women in politics and stuff and campaigning, and I knew it was present. To be honest, the hardest part was volunteers, and particularly volunteers who were from the BIPOC community. I worried about their experiences almost more than I did mine, because people are putting themselves on the line for you. They are going to doors, and what might feel safe for me is not necessarily safe for other people. And so when those experiences would happen to volunteers, that's what would really bother me. And, as women and whatnot, we are socialized to think about safety. And so, not campaigning alone and those sorts of things, but still, when there were those situations, it was hard to accept. And you know what, it's worth a lost vote every single time to challenge somebody on that.
I'm sorry to hear that. How did you deal with that? And how did you deal with that when it affected your volunteers?
So checking in with them and just seeing, are you okay? Do you want to stop for today, or, to really put the decision back in their hands. And, for the most part, they would continue on. And the thing about campaigning is that, like I said, the majority of the people aren't like that. So you go on to another door and another door and another door, and it's not like you leave it behind. Those aggressions definitely stay with people, but the good ends up outweighing the bad. And so we debrief after every canvas, what went well, what didn't, what happened out there. And so there would also always be the opportunity after a campaign to kind of talk it through in more detail. And, you know, what could we do next time? Sometimes it was a matter of like, you know, getting each other away from somebody who is being aggressive. What are the strategies we could use to shut somebody down, get the door closed and move along?
Yeah. For you as a candidate, how did you kind of take that repeat cycle of that and then forge forward? And I know that it's not something that you experienced for the first time when you stepped on the campaign trail. You're unfortunately familiar with this and having been involved for a while. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how do you develop kind of the strength and confidence in yourself to move forward with those sexist remarks and approaches, not just the ones that you get at the door. Some of these would stop somebody from running at some point. So yeah, something in that realm.
Yeah, no, it's a really important question because it does happen. And so, I knew it wasn't personal. I knew it wasn't about me. I knew these people don't even know who I am, to, you know, be saying things about me that are negative or whatnot. It wasn't about me, and it was always about them. And, you know, those kind of viewpoints came with all kinds of other, you know, value misalignments. Obviously, they're not people who would vote for me anyways. They're not the people who, you know, share the same values and the things that I was fighting for. And so I just refocus on who I'm there for, who I'm fighting for, and what's important. And yeah, and it's so intense that it's kind of becomes like water off a duck's back. You just keep going, and it's not personal. And sometimes I honestly, my team would have to pull me away because people would be goading me and debating me on issues that were really important. And I didn't want them to win, not because I wanted to win, but they were saying really offensive things and I didn't want to let it stand. And sometimes my team had to pull me away and remind me that that's not what you're here for. And it's not what's important. So.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's great. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about not necessarily your like experience with having Peggy kind of be the phone call that kind of set things in motion for you, because it was already there. But certainly Peggy played an important role, and there is there's a lot to be said about having women who have been there before, to kind of setting the path and coaching and guiding other women. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the support system that you had, particularly from women who were in politics, and how that helped you, and sort of your vision and hope for where this is going in the future with more women getting involved in setting a stage and opening doors for more women to run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the ask is absolutely important. You know, that's why the Ask Her campaign is so key. You know, even though I had, you know, been involved in politics in lots of ways, would I have run in that election without Peggy asking me? No, absolutely not. And so her ask made the difference to me running, absolutely. And then knowing somebody like Peggy in politics, somebody who counts herself as shy and somewhat reserved. And we tend to think of politicians as very gregarious and very outgoing. And Peggy will always say that she's an introvert. And to know that introverts can be in politics, and somebody like Peggy who believes so deeply in policy, like policy matters and integrity matters, and that you can show up in politics that way. We have so many examples of sort of men and the way that they do politics. And some of those fit for women and many of them don't. And so having examples of women in politics, particularly women who do it what I would see as differently, who are values driven and policy driven and driven by the people, is really important, because it reminds us, and it reminded me, that it can be done that way, that it doesn't have to be this cutthroat. That said, once you are elected, we know from what we see, I don't want to downplay, it's a system built by men for men, and it still very much plays out that way. But to know that there are women in politics that you can connect with and align, who will be there for you and have your back should you win, or even on the campaign trail, is so important, because it is a grueling experience, and there is sexism, and there are a lot of questions. How do you do this? And people who juggle the multitudes of often commitments that women hold around childcare and domestic responsibilities, and even another job, all those types of things is really important. So having women examples, having circles of women around me was really, really key.
That's great. Thanks. One last question.
Sure.
So if you were doing the elevator pitch or the quick hit advice to somebody who is just considering running right now, maybe they're not even considering running, maybe they're just playing with the idea, what is your advice to them?
I would say if there is a piece of you that wants to do it, then feed that piece. You're always going to have reasons to say no. You're always going to have, questions and, I don't think this, but those may need to be answered, but feed the pieces of you that are driven, that little voice in you that says, I think this might be for me. I think I want to do this. Women often come to politics because they want to make a difference, maybe in a certain area or overall. And it is absolutely a place where you belong, where you can make a difference. And if there's any part of you that wants to do it, then find the way. There's always a way.
That's great. Thank you. Is there something that you're no stranger to this campaign? So is there something that you would have wanted to say that I didn't know to ask? Something that you would have just wanted to elaborate on?
I don't think so. Your questions were very, very good. So, no, I guess the only thing would be to acknowledge the difference between different, so I think a municipal campaign can be a little bit of a different situation than a provincial or a federal. And I think the other piece of advice that I would give is surround yourself with a team that is experienced as much as possible, and focus on the things, on being a candidate if you can, and allow your team to do the campaign pieces, right? That's what they're there for, and that's what they're good at. So finding your team, your group of people, is really important. So I think that's it.
That's great. Thank you.